Well, as the wildfire crisis continues to unfold in this country, we are also keeping a close watch on the financial and economic consequences. Many households and businesses are already dealing with financial fallout from high inflation and climbing interest rates. An emergency situation can add further pressure. For more on that, let's bring in our weekend business panel. Rubina Ahmed-Haq is a personal finance columnist and regular contributor at CBC. And Jennifer Bartman is a business advisor and former venture capitalist. Thank you both for taking time and joining us this weekend. Rubina, let's start with you. As a situation like this unfolds, what are some of the personal financial consideration families should be thinking of?
Hopefully families have some emergency funds that they can tap, because the problem is that many of us now work jobs where they're contract, freelance. We don't have that protection where if we're not actually physically doing our job that we're getting paid. And it's a good signal for anybody that is living in an area that is prone to weather-related events to really put some money aside for situations like this, so that if you have to leave your home very quickly, that you can do so and you know you have access to cash. And to also make sure that that cash is somewhere where you can get it very quickly. A lot of people rely on things like lines of credit, or they put their money into even a money market fund. All of that money can't be accessed right away. So to make sure it's in an account where you can virtually go to the ATM and take that money out and use it right away for whatever it is that you need. So those are some of the personal finance considerations that hopefully people have some money. And if they aren't able to, then to access funds like a line of credit would be one of the best ways that they can get through this really tough time.
Jennifer, you've dealt with a number of emergency disasters in your area where you are. What are some of the lessons that you have learned when it comes to being prepared for an emergency?
Well, I would echo what Rubina has said in terms of, finances and so on. But I think information and planning are things that are really important. So making sure that you have access to banking apps on your phone, as simple as that, local credible news sources, understanding which roads in your area may close and may not be accessible. Having that information is incredibly important. And the other thing that I've found useful in living in a flood-prone area and also being in proximity to forest fires earlier this year is having lists. As simple as it sounds, spreadsheets and lists of things you need to take, things you need to stock up on, I should say, and just doing that well in advance so that when you're in a crisis situation, all you really have to deal with is what's in front of you, making sure you have that emergency bag packed. So planning and information are always top of mind for me.
Planning, information, working ahead, looking ahead, all great. But Rubina, these are really tough economic times. And I think for many Canadians watching, the thought of, saving for an emergency probably seems pretty difficult for many households in this country. How do families save when they are dealing with high interest rates, when they are dealing with inflation and the high cost of absolutely everything?
That is one of the most popular questions I get is, where do I find this money to put away that I can then protect myself in an emergency? And it is an absolute valid point. The one thing I say is that even if you can put $10, $15 into that emergency fund, if you're putting money away, you are working towards many, many years later when an emergency might happen. So it's not like you need to save, 6 months worth of your household spending within a month's time. You can take years to get to that level. I think the real message is that there always should be an incentive that no matter what, I'm going to put a little bit of money away into this rainy day fund so that when something does happen, I have some cash. So if an emergency came 2 years from now, you would still have more money than if you did nothing in the last 2 years. The other thing is to really check your insurance policies to make sure that they cover events that your area is prone to. You may have to add on those insurance, those lines to make sure that things like forest fires, flooding are included if something was to happen to your home, because that can be a personal finance disaster where a weather-related event happens, you lose your home, and you have no insurance money to use to rebuild.
Good to check on all of those things, especially with those act of God clauses. Let's talk about, for a moment, some of the considerations for businesses during emergency situations. Jennifer, what should small business owners be thinking about?
Well, there's a couple of things that come to mind, and to pick up on what Rubina said about insurance, what I would say to small business leaders is, when is the last time you've had an in-depth conversation with your insurance broker? And I know this is often on to-do lists. You know, the renewal comes up annually. Oh, I should call that person. Something else happens and you never do. So it's really important to understand what the coverages are, and also to update your broker on changes in your business. And this could be things like renovations to a place of business that you own, new equipment, getting out of certain lines of business, doing business in new geographic areas, for example. You know, all of these are triggers for a conversation, and really understanding what the coverage is. And I would say, when you are thinking about risk management as well, you also want to walk around and take those recent videos, as simple as videos on your phone, of what your premises looks like in the event of a disaster, and making sure that you have all your receipts in the event of claims. So that's one. And then the second thing closely related is the risk management and the disaster planning for business continuity. So all the important things that you need to run your company, it's great if they're in a binder and you've organized that, but if it's left on your desk and you can't access your business premises, that's a real problem. So all of the important things that you need should be stored electronically, remotely somewhere, and you should also have a plan, to the extent that your business can, to continue to operate on a remote basis. And we saw this during COVID-19. It's not as easy as just sending everybody home and saying, okay, get to work now. There's a lot of planning that needs to go around that. So I would encourage business leaders to take a fresh look at both of those areas.
I want to just turn to something else related to what we're seeing with these wildfires, because there has been some criticism on social media directed towards airlines and how they've responded to the emergency evacuation. For example, in Yellowknife, the criticism has focused on pricing and difficulties associated with making flight changes. Air Canada has responded to some of this criticism in a statement, telling CBC News that the airline increased operations in Yellowknife and it is capping fares. Jennifer, what's your view about the role airlines should take in an emergency situation like this?
Well, again, it seems to me that there should be plans that are at hand and ready to be implemented immediately when we see these types of situations. I am of the view that people who are trying to get out of a disaster zone or are trying to cancel airline tickets for a flight coming up to a place that obviously you can't get to should not be facing things like change fees. I mean, there should be some common sense applied here as to how to approach these situations. And it reminds me that just because a company is a large company doesn't mean that it always has these plans, you know, these common sense plans that can be rolled out very quickly. And I think we're seeing some of that here, and it quite frankly doesn't reflect well on these businesses that really should know better. I mean, this is fundamental to the business that they're in.
Before we wrap this up, Irina, I want to ask you one more question of sort of a general broad sort of situation here. We know severe weather conditions like wildfires are raising new issues for Canadians to think about as they travel. What should they be preparing for?
I think climate change is now a consideration when we travel, because we're seeing these, events happen almost every 2 or 3 months. We just saw, we've had flooding in this country. We've seen wildfires across the country, and now we're seeing again where there's evacuations happening. So if you're making a plan, for example, to go to the north in the summer, where a lot of Canadians do travel to because it's a beautiful time to be there, that you should look at the risk of climate change and wildfires and other things that could also affect your plans, and make sure that you have travel insurance that covers you, so that if you are going to be in that area or you plan on being in that area and for some reason you can't go there because it's not safe, like for example going to Yellowknife now would not be a safe decision, that you would be able to cancel that ticket and get a full refund. It used to be that we think about sickness and injury. Now we also have to think about the climate when we're traveling. All
right, we will have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us on the Weekend Business panel. Rubina Ahmed-Haq is a personal finance columnist and regular contributor at CBC. Jennifer Bartman is a business advisor and former venture capitalist. Remember, you can watch the Weekend Business panel every Saturday after 10 a.m. Eastern right here on CBC News Network.